Welcome back. I'm really excited to introduce you to our panelists for our first show right here on Here and Now. On my left, we have Dr. Chitai Murabura. He's a consultant psychiatrist and mental health advocate. And then we have Anita Nderu. She is a media personality. And finally, we have Mariga Thoithi, who is a communications and project consultant. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's such an important subject. It's been topical and top of mind for so many people. So let's just get right into it. We saw Brian Betta jumping over a fence at State House, brandishing a knife, seeking to kill the president. And I think I want to start with Dr. Chitai and asking, are we actually doing enough in Kenya to address matters around mental health, particularly when it comes to young people?
My answer would be that not yet. We are not yet there. This mental illnesses are very many. They're very complex. The history of mental illness in our country, and many countries, to be honest, is characterized by a lot of stigmatization, discrimination, and total exclusion. And the system has so many barriers that prevent people from accessing help. And therefore, a lot of people who have mental illnesses, about 80%, cannot access any treatment. And one of the commonest mental illnesses is depression, which is a mood disorder, that affects an individual's feelings. How they're sad most of the time. They withdraw and they feel suicidal. So these illnesses, when they're not addressed, they'll show up in daily life. So in our homes, we may have violence. In schools, we may have poor performance. We may have indiscipline.
I think
at workplaces,
at some point, I want to come back to the fact that you said we're not yet there.
Yes.
It's just to try and find out how we can keep up with some of the trends we're seeing out there where people are prioritizing mental health. But I want to move to you, Anita. And you've shared in some form your story about your struggle with depression, your struggle with anxiety. How did people react when you opened up? And did it reflect to you the state of mind that we're in terms of just their responses and reactions?
Actually, yeah, it pretty much shocked me because the reason why I was sharing my struggle at the time was because people have this impression when you're a media personality, your life is perfect, everything is great. And then we tend to only share on social media things that make our lives look like we don't have any problems. But then now, at the height of my depression, I was just like, let me just share this so many people will understand, because I'd become a completely different person. I never wanted to leave my home. I didn't want to interact with people. I didn't even want to be online. So then when I was sharing the story, in a matter of minutes, the comments went crazy. Everyone's like, oh my goodness, me too. The same thing is happening to me. Oh, I thought I was alone. Also, such things happen to people like you guys. And I'm like, well, yeah, kind of does. And then I kept getting DMs. They're like, okay, now that they're like, someone's like, I'm going through the same thing. How are you handling it? At what stage are you now? And things like those. So then when I did consider killing myself at some point, I shared the story, I think a month later. And then that's when a lot of people were like, funny, same thing is happening to me. I thought about killing myself as well. In fact, there's a lady who sent me a DM. And I remember I stayed on the phone with her for 2 hours because she sent a message and she said, I'm fed up. Like, my family doesn't get it. My friends don't get it. And I don't know how to explain how I'm feeling. It's just, the depression is just too much now. So I'm going to kill myself at 8 p.m. today. So I was like, please send me your number now. And then I just stayed with her on the phone till like 9 p.m. And then after that, I was like, you absolutely have to get professional help, because if you harm yourself in any way, and then I'm the last person you spoke to, I'm going to get into a lot of trouble. So
it's going to come back to me.
Yes. So I was like, please just stay alive and seek help. Because I mean, it's not something that we've, as Africans, I might say, we're open about. I think the only thing as Africans we're used to is different types of problems. Like, where we rank all of our other problems, we're like, depression can't possibly be one of them.
Yeah, depression can't be. And yet, because of a lot of the other factors, it manifests sometimes in depression. You know what I mean? Mariga, I know you've talked in the past a lot about men and mental health, just in terms of healthy masculinity. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can see you looking around like, which tweet was she reading? But your thoughts on, for example, we saw this BBC interview about Nyandarua village where there's a lot of men who are, in fact, if I can say committing suicide at alarming rates. Your thoughts, even just based off, what Anita said in terms of a young person dealing with these issues on depression, suicidal tendencies, and also particularly men And how is it any different now in terms of the attention that it's getting because it's now men who are struggling with these issues?
It's interesting because the documentary was one part of things that people know. I was having a conversation with a friend over something I wanted to write, and the hospital where she works at has about 10 suicide cases a week.
Oh, 10 suicide cases a week.
Yes.
Attempted or?
Attempted suicide. In fact, it's so common that they have a suicide pack ready for people who come in all the time. Listen, I'd never heard of this before at any point, but she's there at the hospital. So it's an interesting thing because I realized that I had the same story in a different hospital in Meru. They have suicide packs ready for people because people commit suicide in the exact same ways. One of the toughest things I realized as we started looking is that we don't even know what to look for. An article I was reading last week, but one showed that a lot of literature around psychology and psychiatry is based on a typical white woman, right? And so our interpretation of what depression looks like is literally based on white middle-class women. And so what happens when depression manifests itself in young Black men, we can't even see what that looks like. So one of the bigger things we need to do is to, one, have a lot more work and resources based on Black people, based on Kenyans, based on Africans, and work with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that needs to change. Is it, maybe you can tell us, because it absolutely makes sense that it's looked at from a different perspective that's not relatable to a Black person, a Black man, a Black woman. Where at all, whether it's in what you're studying or how you're consulting, where is that starting to show itself in terms of just relearning what depression looks like in a Black setting, in an African setting?
Well, what Mariga says is absolutely true. That, in fact, most of the studies that have been done on mental illnesses, including depression, have been done outside Africa. And so even the tools that assist the doctors, the psychologists to make diagnoses are basically have been tested in other population apart from our own.
Yeah.
And therefore, this calls for more research for one, so that we can even modify some of the tools so that they can be more responsive to our own situations. Because what is known is actually that something like depression will manifest differently in different cultures.
Yeah.
For example, if it's in a place like Nigeria, someone, it will manifest as headache, mostly. And in a place like Kenya, what someone will come and say is that this one is thinking too much. Yeah,
it's trivialized, right? You're overthinking. You're thinking too much. So it's almost trivialized.
Yes. Yeah. And if it's in school, the child may just be indisciplined, just not finishing homework, breaking rules, and all that. These things can be symptoms of depression. And
there isn't, to interrupt you, there isn't any comprehensive research per se on numbers in Kenya. That came out when we were preparing for this. It isn't as clear cut or as deeply researched as it ought to be, and things like that should be prioritized, I think. Otherwise, how are we also dealing with it from a policy level? I was saying earlier, there's countries like the United Arab Emirates who have like a minister for happiness. They have minister for loneliness in the UK. In Venezuela, I think they have another minister. But I think that's their way of saying we are prioritizing this issue, because when you look at all the descriptions from what I read, they're just talking about the fact that we understand that the happiness and well-being of individuals affects society. And so countries are beginning to prioritize it. So what are we waiting for?
I actually love such countries because that perspective is positive, because there is positive psychology, where from where you are, you're trying to see what ways can I improve my well-being. So these are countries that are putting in strategies for people who are well. But for us, we mostly respond to people who are already ill, so that we want to treat them. Yes, while it's cheaper and more beneficial to prevent and promote mental health. And to the population, then what does it mean? It means that we must start thinking of ways in which there's someone who suggested that psychotherapy, for example, should be offered like PE in schools.
Actually,
Well, there we go. That's, I think, a pretty good one. Anita, how are you doing now? How are you just dealing on a day-to-day basis? And what do you wish, I don't know, how do you think other families need to respond to a sister, a brother, a daughter who's going through it?
So first of all, I feel whenever a family member, a friend comes and tells you I'm depressed or I'm having suicidal thoughts, believe them, because it takes a lot of courage to share your story, first of all. And I don't think somebody wakes up in the morning and makes up a story like that, because it's not a fun place to be in mentally. And it'll happen to anyone, regardless of gender, race, how well your life looks, or how well you're doing. You will, literally anyone can get depressed. And then one of the other things that, in fact, I think it's a very good idea to have classes in school, just so that students can, learn about this from when they're younger. And also, where do you find psychiatrists in Kenya? They're like the best kept secret. Because I remember somebody approached me in the DM and said, hi, I know someone. So I'm like, is it that they're just hidden somewhere and you have to be going through a lot to be able to find one, because they're not very easily accessible. And because what happened was, how I knew I was depressed, first of all, I Googled, because Google is usually the first doctor everyone goes to. And then of course it'll tell you you're dying. And then it had a list. And on the entire list, I had, the only things that I didn't have were two things, which was suicidal thoughts and wanting to harm myself. Those were the only two, but I ticked every other box. What happened is now when I was like, okay, fine, I'm depressed, what do? I started speaking to someone. And then the one thing she kept saying was, you need to identify what is causing you to feel this way. And then when I figured out what it was now learning how to let go, and then I did, and then I'm good now. So
have you shared publicly what that was? Is that a space you're in, or you?
There's people who know about it, but the reason why I choose not to share the story per se is because I don't think it'll be good for the people involved. You know what I mean?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But you're in a good space. You're getting the help you need. You're walking. Since she just talked about accessibility, information on psychiatrists, knowing professionals. How can people, first of all, access doctors, but even for those who can't, people who can't afford it in a lot of these settings, which we even mentioned earlier, what happens to them? How do they deal with mental health issues? If you could just summarize.
Yes, psychiatrists are not a kept secret, but it's just that we are few. There are only 100 of us in Kenya, and we need over 15,000 psychiatrists. And so the ratio of a psychiatrist population on average in Kenya could be something from 1 in a million.
We're having this conversation, which is great. And these conversations are beginning to happen more. But as a young person, how do you think it needs to be approached to be more accessible to families, to teachers? How do you think the narrative needs to change for more young people to come forward and say, I feel like I'm struggling?
We are living in a land of broken dreams, for lack of a better chance, right? We're youth who've never seen Kenya working. Every single thing you hear every single day is the next problem, the next scandal. And you're having people who can barely survive. You're asking them to get better. You're asking them to think beyond that. When you're in a situation like this, and the way the country is at this point, this is how far you can see, right? When you're asking someone what their 5 or 10-year plans are, they have none. Their plan is to survive till the end of the week, right? And that's why a lot of these discussions are hard, because it's good to have a broad discussion around mental health, but it's much more important to have it contextually in terms of what exactly are you going through, right? How people are developing around that, because that's a very big factor towards why youth are the way they are in many ways.
Yeah, the social, economical, political factors. Thank you. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll react to some of the stories and hashtags that we've been following over the last few days. We'll be back.